Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Just got off the phone with Steph Davis, climber, base jumper, wingsuiter, trail runner. She chases it hard out there in the desert. She lives in Moab, has had a fascinating, interesting life. She was a musician and a pianist and then went to law school and chased a PhD for a little while, but just fascinating, contemplative, very cool person. I met her originally out at a Garmin ambassador thing a couple years ago, and I've been wanting to get her on the show because, as I've promised to you, we're trying to reach out to people that are beyond the kind of paragliding spectrum that we typically talk to. So Steph does fly, and so does her husband, but she's much more interested in climbing rock and jumping off them. So this is a great one. I think you're going to get a lot out of this and really enjoy it. We dive pretty deep into just life and adventure. And so I think you're going to enjoy this show. Very brief housekeeping. Just got delivered yesterday a whole big box of brand new Cloud-Based Mayhem trucker hats from Patagonia. So these are very, very cool, and I'll have those up on the store shortly. So if you're looking for some cool trucker hats, have a look on the website here in a couple days, and I'll have that all live for you. And the other one is insurance. We have updated the insurance article for travel and for accident insurance, especially when you're out of the country or more than 100 miles away from home. The article on the website, when you just put in the search term insurance, it's called Unscrambling Insurance. Are you covered? Have a look at that. I've just updated that. We're working more closely with Geos, who is they are the ones that are activated when you hit your SOS on your spot or your inReach. And so they have very similar coverage to the coverage I've been talking about with Global Rescue. It's not quite the same, and Global Rescues is a little more padded and has a lot more with it, but you could also go the Geos route when you travel, and so not just for SOS when you press that button, but for evac insurance and repatriation and getting you home. And then also some updates with the travel insurance with having comps covered and that kind of thing. So go check out that article and ping me on whatever platform you like to use if you have any questions. But let's get into it for now. Please enjoy this conversation with a very fascinating person, Steph Davis. Steph, so excited to have you on the podcast. I have been pretty myopic about interviewing a lot of paragliders, so I'm excited to interview you and talk to you about your wonderful, fanciful world of jumping and biking, climbing, and also free flight, but free flight in a much more, I guess, extreme way than what we typically talk about. So welcome to the Mayhem, and thanks for sharing your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. And you're in Moab now, right?
I am, yeah.
That's my first question is why Moab? Why has that been your center, your base?
I came through Moab, let me think. I was a college sophomore, and at the time I was at Fort Collins at Colorado State University. So I came to Indian Creek to climb because Indian Creek is, this huge destination for crack climbing. And didn't really stop in Moab so much, but I loved Indian Creek. And then when I was out of school and just basically became a climbing bum, it was the best place that I could think of to be. So it became my base at that time. I wasn't really jumping. This was like 25 years ago, something like that. But then when I started base jumping, as it turns out, Moab is also a world destination for base jumping, and I mean, really everything. I'm pretty big into trail running. If you like river sports, mountain biking, it's kind of like this place where you can do all of these great activities, and it's getting a lot of tourism now, which is affecting the town and how the town feels. But it always has been that kind of small town vibe too.
I've always just had such a I went to CU in Boulder. And so when I was a climber I got into climbing back just out of high school and into college. And, it just captured me. And so I chased it probably way too hard for a while. And so we would take these, long road trips out to Moab for like one day of climbing and go all the way back. And, it's just, but I was also a big, am now a huge fan of Edward Abbey. And the way he writes about that place is just, it's such a special area.
Have you flown here in the LaSalles?
I haven't, and that's ridiculous. I haven't actually flown in Colorado. I mean, I know you're in Utah, but every time I've gone down that way, I always get hung up around Virgin and Zion, and I just don't keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I should. There's a lot of guys are doing flights, and girls are doing flights from like Monroe Peak down by Monroe, and also like from Innsbruck, and they've landed in Moab. They've flown all the way across, most of Utah and gotten to you. And so I'd love, that would just be such a cool flight. But no, I haven't. I need to.
It's pretty cool. I mean, there's a pretty small paragliding community here, but people are motivated and people are doing pretty cool stuff up in the LaSalle. So not doing like big cross countries out of it, but just having a good time flying around those peaks. So if you're ever just passing through, it would be a fun thing.
And don't you guys have that, what do you call it? It's like a turkey boogie.
Yeah, there's it's Thanksgiving time of year, and a lot of base jumpers just kind of like flock to Moab, and it's
good word.
It's loosely
Thanksgiving
organized.
And flocking. That's a great word.
I would have a hard time calling it organized per se, but it's just basically like people know that at that time of year, a lot of people come to town.
And you set up that crazy net thing, right, where you walk out there and then just drop through.
The slackline people do that. So at the same time, it's funny because it started, years ago, it was really loose and casual. It was Jimmy and Marta, Apex Base, used to be Vertigo, and they just would have Thanksgiving dinner at their house for like the 10 or 15 friends that would come to Moab. And they called it the Turkey Boogie. And then from there, it's kind of expanded into this just concept where, a lot of people come, and then the slackline people kind of got in on the same thing where they started having this big event at the same time of year. So it's just, there's a lot going on at that time.
So let's imagine you come over to a party, like I'm throwing a party and you come over and there's a bunch of people there that haven't heard your name or don't know you. And they ask you, hey, nice to meet you. What do you do? How do you answer that?
I always kind of flail when people ask me that. It's funny. I think partly because I do a lot of different things, and partly because it's sort of a weird career in a way. So it's like not one of those easy things where somebody says, "What do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I'm a nurse." And then you can move on.
Right.
It just opens this entire can of worms where people are like, what does that mean? So sometimes I'm kind of like, usually it depends on who you're talking to. Actually, it's funny you said that because I was just at the dentist and the dental hygienist goes, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm an athlete. And he goes, what does that mean? And then, you have your mouth open.
Right.
And so,
wow.
I know. I'm like, well, this is sort of a tough conversation while you're cleaning my teeth. And then finally I just said, I'm a climber and I do a lot of marketing. I was just trying to keep it short because I was getting my teeth cleaned. But but again, it just depends because a lot of people that move in our communities, everybody knows exactly what that means if you say that you make your living as an athlete. But when you get out of these sports communities, people just aren't as familiar with that as a job. And there's different aspects, right? There is the marketing side, there's being an influencer. I also have my own businesses on different levels. So a lot of times it just depends on who I'm talking to as to what I think that they would relate to or might find a little more relatable, because it's usually because we're having a conversation.
So I didn't know about your life outside of being an athlete. What are the businesses?
Well, I run my own climbing events in Moab, and I've done that for the last 10 years now. And so that is my business. I always bring my sponsors into it because it's great for them too, but It is my business. And so it's basically running events.
Okay, so that's like what Rebecca does here with Rebecca's Private Idaho with her bike, with her gravel thing.
Oh, I don't know it, but it's probably, I would imagine it's about the
Yeah,
same
I
type.
think that's a huge part of her, just personal success is running these events.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have to check that out. I didn't know what she was doing with that. That's cool.
So that's okay. If you don't mind me asking, how much, like, how do you divide your athlete side of things and influencer side of things with events? What is
Uh-huh.
it, 60/40? Is it 90/10?
Well, I also have gotten into public speaking.
Okay.
And so that's another, I would call another arm of my business. And so, because they're all very different on some level and they all fill different niches for me, from a business perspective and kind of from a personal perspective. And so, to me, the way I see the way I make a living is one side is being an athlete, ambassador, influencer, however you like to title that or whatever the deliverables might imply. And then the other side is my clinics. And then the other side is public speaking.
Okay. And do you have a manager, or are you doing all this on your own?
I don't have a manager. That has been sort of a challenge over the last years by far. And so pretty recently I started working with a friend who he's an agent manager, but since I'm so established and I have created so much of the stuff that I'm kind of dealing with on my own, it's a really nice kind of synergy where basically if I have something that I don't think I can handle in terms of negotiation or something like that, I can just pass it off to him. And then if he has something, because he has a bunch of other clients that he kind of manages full time, if he has something that comes through his carousel and he's like, oh, this would be a great fit for Steph, then he'll call me. So it's really, really nice, because the problem I've had in the past looking to potentially work with a manager is that typically people want to manage your whole everything for you. And I've been doing this for a really long time, and I have a lot of relationships that I don't think would work if I tried to hand them off to somebody else. And so I've never been able to say, oh, yes, take control of all my contracts, all my relationships. I've just haven't really felt able to do that. So what I have going on with Matt is super nice, because it's just a very, it's kind of like a one by one type thing.
I always compare kind of what we do, and you're doing it at a different level, obviously. But for a long time, I dated a gal named Jody McDonald, who's a very, very talented photographer. And it was really interesting to watch her work, because so much of the work was at the computer and not shooting.
So much.
It was unbelievable how much editing.
Is.
I mean, it was like 90/10 of just marketing and getting stuff out there and making the contacts and editing and just editing over shooting. And it always seemed backwards to me.
It's amazing. Well, and I know, because I think you do almost exactly what I do with probably some variations, but it's crazy that to me, when I think of what I do for work, it's not the sports that I do or the training that I do. If I only did that, I don't think that would not lead to me being successful from a business perspective. And that's always the irony, because I think sometimes people look at you from the outside and they think, oh, look, she gets paid to climb and base jump. And it's absolutely not. It's
get paid to provide content.
Exactly. And to, foster relationships and, provide services and, do all the things that are not the going out climbing and jumping part.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I'd like to get your take on this. Well, first, when did you figure out that this could be a lifestyle? I mean, did this kind of just organically happen out of college, or was this something that you were, from when you were 10, you're like, I'm going to be a professional athlete?
I didn't really do sports as a kid, and I wasn't brought up in a family that actually valued athletics at all or outdoor activities. So I grew up in the East Coast and pretty kind of sheltered suburban lifestyle. Professional parents that really believe in education, things like that.
God forbid, what?
Yeah, which is, those things are all great, but there was definitely a lot of great things I got from my parents. For just a really strong sense of discipline, serious work ethic, being very conservative in your lifestyle, by which I mean like living under your means, not within your means. All these things that have really served me very well in climbing and in life, but none of those things were brought into like the outdoor realm. So when I started climbing, I was 18, and it was just something I didn't know anything about it at all. Especially, this is in the early 90s.
Was that the move to Fort Collins? Was that what was that the catalyst? Was just being in a new place, meeting new people?
Oh no, I started climbing in Maryland.
Okay.
I got taken out for a day, and it was real small, so people were kind of desperate to find people to climb with, because we didn't have the climbing gyms and the media and stuff like that. It was just this kind of weird fringe thing. So I just totally fell in love with it. It was something really different for me. And then that precipitated me moving out to Colorado, because we didn't really have the climbing gym scene back then. So if you wanted to climb, you had to actually go get out where the rocks were. And Colorado was making a lot more sense. So I transferred to Colorado State University and then did a master's degree there. And that kind of just got me out of the East Coast.
What was your master's in?
In literature.
Oh, fascinating. Do you do a lot of writing?
Yeah, I do. I especially did a lot in the last, I would say, couple decades. And when I wrote my second book, that was kind of a big push because I hadn't done such long form stuff in a while with all the blogging and social media. And nowadays I think like a lot of people, a lot of my writing I almost feel like it sounds like ridiculous to say this, but is geared more towards the social media format. Mm-hmm. So I'm not doing anything more long form right now. Even my blogging has really dropped off recently. Just it's kind of like the first thing to go when I get too busy.
Right. Sure. Well, I want to talk to, that's a world that I'm fascinated by. And I definitely want to talk more about your business. But so let's get to that point. When you were back in Colorado and, you got really into climbing, when did it kind of hit you that like, okay, instead of literature, I'm going to be a climber?
Well, okay, so I started climbing in Maryland, and I was actually majoring in music at that time. I had been a musician my whole life and was really serious about it. And I was a pianist, and in my mind, I thought that's what I was going to pursue. When I started climbing, everything just kind of blew up and got really derailed because I just wanted to climb so much. And so I quit piano, I quit music, and I changed my major to English because I also really liked reading. So that's just kind of what made sense at the time. I was on scholarship, so I wasn't going into debt for this. And then, when I went out to Fort Collins, I really loved school actually. And when I got my master's, I was a teaching assistant, which meant that my tuition was being paid and I was teaching writing. So I was taking courses to learn how to teach at the same time. So it was kind of this really cool dual experience. It really, to me, it was so much better than just getting the English degree because I was also learning how to teach. So I was enjoying all that a ton. Going to school, teaching, climbing, it was this really great balance of everything. And when I graduated, I guess the expectation of my family was that if you have a master's degree in English, you're going to do something else. Yeah. And so I applied to PhD programs. I almost went to Salt Lake to get a PhD in American Studies at University of Utah. I was very close to doing that. But instead, I just honestly, I kind of panicked, and I had also been accepted to a bunch of law schools, and I spent the summer climbing in Estes Park. I was really happy. I was waiting tables. It was great. And then, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't just not do anything. And so I started school in Boulder Law School, after just, the summer after the master's degree. And within a week, I just thought, I can't do this. I got to go climbing. And so I made this pretty big leap and started living in my Oldsmobile and climbing and without really a plan.
You became a dirtbag.
I became a dirtbag. Yeah. And so that was kind of what it was. It was sort of like I was in this nice little fairy tale where I could go to school and I could be respectable and I was teaching and, everything was great. And that was working really well with climbing. And then when that was over and I kind of had to move forward on a different plane, it just wasn't letting me climb like I wanted to climb. And I kind of had to make that choice. And it was real scary. But that's what I did.
I imagine your parents weren't exactly thrilled either.
No, this was a really hard time for everyone.
Have they come around?
They have. I mean, first of all, my older brother, he's a doctor. So that helps.
That helps.
They have
yes.
one good one.
Right.
He's also a skier and a paraglider and a base jumper, but he's a lot more. He always stayed on track, I guess.
He's more responsible.
Yeah. So he at least wasn't stressful. And yeah, for my parents, it was really tough. I mean, it was tough for me too, especially in the beginning, because again, you have to wind the clock back. This is 1995. There is no Free Solo the movie. There's no constant media with extreme sports. There's no climbing going to the Olympics. There's no sponsored climbers making a living. It wasn't like that. And so being a climber meant you had to go be a dirtbag. And that part was just, obviously think of yourself as a parent. That part was just really hard to deal with. And then on the secondary level, the fact that climbing has danger attached to it. And I was also pretty quickly getting into this big expedition phase. And so I was going to Pakistan and South America. And again, we didn't have internet like we do now. So I would just literally disappear for like 2 or 3 months out of the year, or actually a season. And I wasn't really living anywhere permanent, even when I came back. And so, yeah, I think as a parent, it was probably a nightmare, especially parents with my priorities, or that my parents' priorities.
Tough question, but do you miss those days?
Yeah, I do on so many levels. I mean, there are really ways in which I don't, because I remember very well what it was like to be just hanging out in the back of my truck. And then, it's a rest day and it's very boring. And you've read all your books and you've written in your journal, you did your laundry and you took your shower and you still got like 10 more hours till tomorrow. And, and then, also just thinking like, what am I doing with my life? I just walked away from my entire life path and I don't know where this goes. And that's kind of scary and stressful. And, will I ever have a house to live in? I doubt it. I don't have any money.
Right.
I really don't miss that part of it. What I do miss is the reason I did that, and the trade-off was just the absolute focus on what I wanted to be doing. And literally 100% of my life was directed toward climbing. And it was also a really nice moment in time where we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have internet. And so every few rest days, I would take my calling card and go to a payphone and call my parents, or I would send postcards to people. So I miss that pace of life. And I think that, they always say there's no going back, because I wouldn't go back to that time of my life right now for many reasons, but that life is also gone because you can't escape the fact of global connection now. You can't just disappear in Patagonia, because if you go to Patagonia, your cell phone works and people expect you to answer emails.
I think we all miss that. I was asked a question when we were touring with North Unknown when I was in Telluride. I was asked a question by the audience. We did this kind of panel thing with Timmy O'Neill and stuff, and I just flailed. And the question was basically like, how do you deal with the fact that you have to be a content provider, that you have to be doing, does that take away from the experience, when you're going across Alaska? And the answer is, of course, yes. Of course it takes away from the experience. It totally changes it. It totally, and you can have a really good attitude about it, but it's not something I've figured out It's not something I figured out, that like that balance between the 90s and now. I think it's something we all miss, because I used to read a lot more books. That's just,
Right.
I just feel like my job now is never done. I just constantly have, God, I got to do another Instagram, whatever. It's just, in a lot of ways, when I'm asked, what is my question here? When I'm asked from people, hey, like I want to get into being a sponsored athlete, my answer most of the time is like, you know what? I think it's better to just get a job and then go do this stuff. Get a decent job, that you like, that you can be passionate about, and that you can, that allows you enough time off that you can just go climb or do whatever you do without any of that. I don't know. I mean, I often feel like I work much harder at the content side than I would if I just had a job.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to achieve the balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of people in life.
Sure.
And so
no
I
matter
think
what they're doing.
Yeah, because everything is so nonstop nowadays. And I think our culture in this country is very focused on working and succeeding. And then not just that, I think that we are very insecure in this country because we don't think that there are systems in place to help us with things, like healthcare or childcare or, pensions, things like that. Like that doesn't really exist.
Nope.
And so I think that because we have so little feeling security, it's really difficult to say, oh, now it's time to stop and I like where I'm at and things are good financially and I'll do the other things, because none of us really know what's going to happen at any time. And honestly, I almost think it's harder to be in a traditional job and dealing with those feelings, because I think when you've lived pretty lean and you know how to be a minimalist, and there are things that you prioritize a lot more than maybe more material things, you do have that security of like, hey, I know how to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think that, it's really a good thing to understand. I mean, let's put it this way. Pretty much the most joyful I ever was in my life was when I had nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. When you're living at that level, there's not a lot to worry about, is there?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, when you can. I mean, when you don't have kids and you don't have responsibilities. I'm talking about like the comparison would be Alex, pre-free solo and all of that. Life was pretty simple, and there's no doubt that life has gotten a little more erratic and a little more crazy. And I'm sure he struggles with that too. What he's able to do with all that fame and everything is fantastic, with his foundation and everything else. It's just terrific. But yeah, it's just more complicated.
It is. But again, I think it's really easy to glamorize the kind of dirtbag times. And again, there's a lot that, isn't that fun when you're doing it. And it is stressful in many ways.
Sure. And the grass is always greener, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So like I said, as much as I think there's wonderful things about it, there's also a lot it leaves to be desired.
Yeah. Well, good point. When making a jump here, literally, when did jumping happen and why?
I started skydiving initially. It was in 2007. So what are we, 20 now?
Yep.
Like 12, 13 years ago. And then, being a climber, living in Moab, it was pretty quick that I realized, hey, there's all these cliffs around here. I guess it makes a lot more sense to be jumping off the cliffs than skydiving all the time. So that's kind of what took me into base jumping.
People that are listening to this have got to be, when they just heard your history of being a pianist and going to looking at PhDs and getting into law school and being a writer, and then you jump off cliffs. I have often found most of the people actually that I've met that wingsuit and base jump are so contemplative and so often very well educated. And I think for many people that haven't done it or that don't know that culture are surprised by that.
Yeah. It's all really problem solving on some level. And, just like climbing, just like, I guess, any sort of adventure sport, mountain pursuit, it's so much problem solving. I mean, don't you find that with paragliding?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this sport attracts tons of engineers. It's something I've discovered with the podcast, but also, in the X Alps in the race one day, I was walking around off a mountain with two engineers. This is so interesting.
Yeah, because there's so much of the analytical part, and that I find that part really fun. I think obviously I enjoy being outside. I enjoy moving. I enjoy exercising. And so that's where skydiving is always a little bit problematic for me, because I have a hard time spending my whole day in an airplane hangar and sitting in a plane and going back to the hangar and sitting in the plane. Like, for me, that's tough. I would rather walk up the hill. So that's kind of where base jumping is great, because you get that kind of air sports analytical problem solving thing, but then you get to go up the hill also.
Sure. One of the kind of most sobering and also intense podcasts or shows we've done was way back in the beginning with our friend, Jeff Shapiro. And this was right after Dean and Graham had died. And, obviously he was going through a very, I think at that point he'd lost 43 friends, and now it's quite a few more to wingsuiting and base jumping. Recently, I saw a statistic, and I tried to pull it up before we started chatting, but it had, it was like the statistics of jumping but also many other extreme sports, like paragliding had this. I can't remember if it was 1,000 hours or 1,000 jumps or 1,000 flights. They had it kind of pared down in some way where, paragliding wasn't great. It was like 2.9% or something, but base jumping was almost 100. Have you seen this one?
No.
I think it's for people that participate longer than 6 years. And I don't know how that, but what does that mean? Does that mean in 500 jumps a year, or does that mean one? So I don't know how they qualify all this. Tough. That's always the hard thing. I mean, data and statistics are always tricky, but how do you, every time you go up the hill to jump, is it something that crosses your mind? Is it something you have to process? Is it something you have a way that you feel, no, this is something I can participate in safely?
That's, I guess, having climbed for so long before I started base jumping, it just seems like that's mountain sports. I guess I don't feel base jumping is particularly this certain death activity compared to like when I go climbing, if that makes sense. Yep. Because over the years through climbing, I lost a lot of friends in the mountains and in climbing accidents and in just life stuff,
Sure.
as well. So I guess by the time I started base jumping, I didn't, maybe if I did no sports ever, or just had never known anybody who died ever, and then I got into base jumping, then maybe it would feel more directly connected. Like maybe I would think, oh, it's only possible to die or get hurt if you base jump, but that hasn't been the case in my experience.
Do you have a favorite? Trail running, base jumping, skydiving, climbing? Is there something that's tugging on your heartstrings more these days?
Well, it's kind of neat. I've been doing this stuff for a pretty long time now. I started climbing in 91, and I've always had this approach to climbing and sports where there's certain things that I have found that I really like. And so those things always stay pretty stable and constant, but then I'll just go through phases depending on what I'm most interested in, where I am, what the season is, just who knows why, really. And so they always kind of like circle round and round. Like, for example, there were a lot of years of climbing when I was just really into big wall climbing and expeditions. And then there were a lot of years where I was all about alpine climbing. Then for a few years, I was all about El Cap free climbing. So it's kind of neat, because I think that's what keeps the longevity, is the fact that like things always just kind of like change here and there. So right now it's kind of funny because for about 9 or 10 years, I thought my knees were just shot from too much trail running and hiking with packs and things like that. I tore an ACL, and I was always having knee pain every time I ran and hiked in the mountains. And I went to this physical therapist last spring, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is no big deal. Just do these 4 things." And I was like, "What?" And because I had pretty much let go of trail running on some level. I mean, I was doing it, but not really. And pretty much since then, I am like full on like back at running. Yeah, it's super exciting. So it's been like almost a year. So right now it's like I'm trail running like daily, and it's just I just thought I couldn't anymore, you know. So that's been super awesome, and I'm pretty focused on climbing in the desert right now, free climbing, because it's winter and that's kind of the top season for me to do that. And so I'm base jumping, you know, a lot less, just a couple times a week right now, like maybe 3 times a week, which for me is pretty little, and not really skydiving because it's winter season, but it's just based on the season.
Do you base jump now just to kind of stay current?
Just because I enjoy it.
Okay.
You know,
just going for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's always why I base jump.
And when you wingsuit as well, right? Okay. Is there one you do more of?
I would say because where I am right now in Moab, it's the easy, fast, like I can just go out, hike for half an hour, do a slider off base jump, boom, I'm home in an hour. So that's kind of like a really quick and easy thing. So I definitely do more slider off base jumping. There's a couple wingsuit jumps here that are good, but they're a little more of an outing. Like usually from door to door to do a wingsuit jump here for me is like 4 or 5 hours.
If you could, you know, for the people that are listening that wanted to get into it, what's kind of some critical advice?
To base jumping
and wingsuiting.
And wingsuiting. Well, the sequence is generally you skydive first and do a lot of skydiving. But the biggest advice that I try to give to people is, especially if you're not coming into it as like, if you're coming into it as somebody who's an alpinist, I think you kind of have this mentality already, or a rescue professional. Because there's a lot of jumpers that come in and they're firefighters or EMTs or paramedics or like military or something. SEALs, they generally have the same mentality, but a lot of people, if you just come in from skydiving, you don't have this self-sufficiency mentality. And I think that's really important. When I go base jumping, I have a kit that I carry. It's really light. And I carry a little fanny pack that I wear on my front. So it's on my belly when I jump. And, you know, obviously I always have the InReach Mini, always. Mm-hmm. And so I've just seen enough accidents and been around enough accidents that I want to, and this comes from climbing too, right? Because back in the day, we didn't have satellite devices at all. And when you go in the mountains, like, no matter what happens, either you're going to have to crawl out or your partner's going to have to carry you out if you're going to get out, no matter, you know, that's what you expect. So I think that's a really good mindset to bring into base jumping, because I think for a lot of people that only come in through skydiving, they don't realize that, okay, now I'm going into the mountains and the backcountry, and it's different, you know, it's not front country stuff. And I need to be prepared to deal with myself if something goes wrong or something happens unexpectedly.
Have you had an accident?
When I first started base jumping in my first year, I came into it pretty quickly from skydiving. I don't think I did enough skydiving. I did less than I would recommend to people. I had done like less than 200 skydives. And so I didn't have great canopy skills. And I had 2 bad landings. I had pretty minor injuries, but for me, it was a really big deal because as a climber, you know, like if you hurt your pinky, it's like a really big deal.
Yeah. There's no downtime in climbing.
Right.
Train.
Oh my God, you know, it was a good eye opener for me, a really good reality check, because I I don't really feel I can afford to be injured at all and do the things I want to do. And so, that kind of sent me back to really improve my canopy skills and really kind of just get it a little more of like, hey, you really got to be smart about this, and lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever had to, in any of the accidents that you've been kind of close to, they're good friends, has it ever been so just disorienting? Have you ever had to kind of leave the sport for a while, or has it been something since 2007 you've pursued pretty steadfastly?
Well, when my husband Mario died and we were on the same wingsuit jump, obviously that was, extremely life altering. And I spent a long time just trying to figure out how to live really without him, and how to live basically. That was the primary problem. And I guess after like a month or so of pretty severe grieving, like, don't get out of bed except maybe for a short walk kind of grieving, I was like, hey, I got to focus on like eating food and doing things, and I have to go outside, and this has to happen because this is the only way, So I started forcing myself to go climbing a little bit every day if I could. And I would force myself to go do a short base jump just because I just had to make myself do things. But it did really, the idea of wingsuit base jumping felt really, it was really hard to think about that at first, because that was exactly how he died. And I didn't really know how that was going to play out initially, but after some time I missed flying. And so I just thought, well, I need to see, I need to go do this to see if I want to do it, basically.
Do you think we get addicted to this stuff in a way because of the escape side of it, or because of just being in the moment? The rest of life gets shed away. Thinking about this when your husband died, there probably wasn't a better way to escape, at least temporarily, from that heaviness.
I don't know. Again, as a climber, I started climbing when I was 18, and I'm 47 now. So my entire adult life, that's what I've done. And all the outdoor sports kind of are the same, whether it's running or skiing or base jumping or wingsuiting or whatever. So it's funny when we have conversations like this, because people always ask me these types of questions. It's always, I think that the presumption behind the question is it would be normal if you didn't do these sports. So it has to be this very conscious decision to do them. For me, these are the things I do. It's, it's like if somebody was having the same conversation with me relative to like exercise, I would be just kind of scratching my head, like, of course I exercise. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Of course I breathe air and drink water and eat vegetables. There's just things I do. So to me, it's never been this thing of, if I would not do these things, then how would my life be? That wouldn't be the status quo, I guess.
Yeah, and that's not who you are. Yeah, it's something I've been trying to contemplate and answer for decades. And I don't know that I have a very good answer for it. It'd be a life compromise without it, for sure. And I think
it's always a funny mindset. And I think sometimes we don't even question it, because most of us have grown up in a society where these things are considered maybe like extra or, not normal or something.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things that nobody would have this conversation about driving a car, which is bizarre.
Which is more dangerous. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And, it's kind of like dangerous, and there's a lot of negatives attached to it. Of course, there's positives. That's why we do it. But we would never sit here and, kind of contemplate like, should I really be driving a car? How would it be were I not to drive a car? But it's funny. It's right. It's like what we consider, what our hive mind considers to be normal versus what it doesn't. I guess my hive mind is the things I do are just kind of that would be normal, I guess.
Well, let me ask you this. This is an interesting one because when, for a few years we had films at Banff, and they would always premiere at Banff. And my mom, I'd always brought my mom because that was her birthday too. So that was kind of her birthday present. We always had a blast going to Banff. And she would sit next to me and just take my knee off when my film would come up. And I was like, Mom, I'm sitting right here. You know the ending. I made it. But, she's had to put up with this my entire life. And she she's decades ago, she accepted it. It was just, this is who you are. I'm curious about how your parents treat it. What do you guys talk about at Christmas?
They're better with it now. I think especially because I have been doing all of these things for so long, and it's, things have gone well for me in my life as a person and professionally. Obviously, it was really hard for my parents as well as me when Mario died, and that didn't go well. But again, these are things we all have to deal with, I think, in life. It's not unique to me doing the sports I do. I think a lot of parents are going to have to be faced with all of these things. So, but I think they're more comfortable with it at this point. I think they can't let go of wishing that I would be maybe more similar to them. But I think that's just kind of who they are on some level.
Right. If you could rewind that clock back to, 95, when you're getting out of college, you and I are the exact same age, so these numbers are easy for me. Would you do anything differently? Or you can think about, while you're thinking about that, if you could go back and talk to that 20-year-old self coming out of college, what advice would you give Steph?
The main advice I would give myself would be to not worry as much about the future. Because like I said, I had a lot of anxiety about it. And that was really hard during that time. And I would tell myself, don't worry about it, because whatever happens, you're going to figure it out. And I tell myself that now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I try to do the same. Stop worrying.
Yeah, just having the confidence that you're going to figure it out.
If you can imagine 10 years from now, what do you think you'll regret doing too much of or too little of?
Too much of. Gosh, I hate to say this, but working.
Content.
But that's probably not true. It is nice to have a balance, right?
Sure.
And I think that's what I craved when I was younger, and that's what I was lacking, was any balance. And I think I'm pretty thankful that I do have that balance. So, and I think I'm at a pretty good place with balance right now, in terms of, really being able to say, okay, this is the time I'm doing this thing, and this is the time I'm doing that thing, and then feeling like I got to do all the things. I think that's really good.
You're climbing, trail running. I mean, I'm sure it, in some aspects, jumping and wingsuiting is quite physical in terms of, certainly in terms of the approach.
Yeah, hiking, which is great.
What I mean, I know you train really hard, but what non-training thing has had the most positive impact on what you do? Yeah, so I'm thinking about like visualization or meditation, or are there things you do that aren't physical, specific to your success?
Definitely visualization is a big thing. That's a good thing. I've always done that. And being really organized, funny enough, helps me a lot. I think I've spent a lot of years just living a pretty chaotic lifestyle on some levels, and I always seem to have a lot going on. And I have found for myself that the more I can kind of organize my physical environment and minimize it, that seems to really help me focus on things. And so in recent years, I've kind of embraced that. I think it used to happen more easily, like when I lived in a truck, because it was pretty simplistic, and it was really easy to have everything around me tidy. I didn't really have anything. It was great. And then as I kind of went through life and, started having houses and storage things and things, things you need to keep and all this stuff, I really noticed after a while that it was kind of getting to me. And so I've been really, really aggressive in the last few years with minimizing and just continuously making sure I don't have too much stuff and that everything is very, not perfectly orderly, but at least pretty well organized, where if I want to just say, oh, hey, you want to go to Notch Peak this weekend in wingsuit? It's like I grab my wingsuit rig, I grab a couple of clothes and then jump in the van and boom.
It's not a big deal. You can just go do it.
Exactly. And being a lot better about keeping stuff minimal and orderly has really, I've noticed that in a weird way, I think that's kind of what I was missing about being a dirtbag, is the fact that it was inherently like that.
Right.
So yeah, just trying to be minimal, trying to be really orderly, because otherwise it's easy to feel like there's too much going on. And then when there's too much going on, it's so much harder to focus.
When you think about jumping, when you think about base and wingsuiting over the years, is there something that kind of pops out in that, wow, that really changed my life? That has made me different? Or, I don't know, more something?
You mean the fact that I do it, or
an experience you've had while doing it? That you can, maybe there's just collectively all the jumps, or maybe there was one that just changed you as a person.
An obvious answer is the jump that Mario died on. I'm not the same person I used to be. I'm very different in many ways. I think partly because of how Mario was and who he was, I really carry this feeling of the joy of every moment, loving every moment, appreciating every moment. And then even more so now that he's gone.
All right. You must have some kind of rules, things that you've learned all these years in seeing accidents. How are there things you could pass along to jumpers that listen to the show, but also that are thinking about it, that could maybe divert carnage?
Yeah. It's funny because there's so many accidents in air sports, and I really feel like so many of them are easily preventable. And I think there are, of course, the ones that aren't preventable, that, stuff just happens. But a lot of them are just very simple things, like checking your equipment, knowing your equipment, maintaining your equipment, conditions. I mean, you know that, right?
Yeah.
Conditions. My husband now, Ian, he had a very bad accident almost exactly 1 year ago with a speed flyer. And he knew he was going out in funky conditions, and he's an experienced jumper, experienced pilot. And he made the decision to go out in questionable conditions and have an accident. And so I think that almost doesn't matter what your experience level is. It's just having that discipline with yourself. And you know how hard that is, because you're always somewhere and it's a little marginal, and sometimes you've done that and it went okay, so you think it's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
But really, I think if
positive reinforcement for negative decisions, it's super powerful.
Exactly, because you get lucky and maybe you don't even realize that you just got lucky because you think it was fine, and because we can't see it, right?
True.
So I feel like if you would take out all of the equipment issues and the decision making / conditions issues, we'd be left with a lot less accidents.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sounds like a lot of ego there. isn't it? I mean,
I think sometimes people really want to jump. You know?
Yeah.
And I feel that. I mean,
Sure.
I've been there, and it's tough, you know. But I think the biggest advice I would give to people is, and this is the advice I give to myself, is that when it's at all questionable for me at an exit point, if it's at all questionable for any reason, the decision is to walk down. And so that takes out that whole thing of, oh, you know, I'm a little bit this, or I'm not sure about that. So what, and then you kind of sit there and you go in circles, and then someone else jumps and it turns out okay. You know, that whole thing. My rule is, if there's something there's enough something that's not right that I'm questioning it too much, then the rule is I walk down.
If there's doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah, on some level, because, you know, who cares? You go jump again later. Who cares?
Right. Sure. Well, great advice.
But that's hard. It's really hard. And I know I've done a lot of jumps I shouldn't have.
Yeah, sure. It's life, isn't it? We do a lot of things we're not supposed to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question, Steph. This is just such a fun talk, but I know you've got some other things you've got to move off to. If you could solve one thing in the world, what would it be?
That is a very good question.
Just one.
If I could solve one thing in the world, it would be people hurting each other instead of helping each other.
Terrific.
Because that's the thing that drives me crazy about this world. Because I feel like there's so much stuff that we can't control, like the nature stuff, but we can control the things that we are doing. And so I feel like if we just get rid of all the people doing bad things to each other and replace it with people helping each other, that would be so great.
That would be a terrific start. That'd be terrific. Steph, thank you so much. This was we got a little deep there, and that's always a good thing. But I just appreciate talking to you. You're just so fascinating and fun to watch. And I hope I get to come watch you in person more often here in the future. But thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Steph.
Have a good day.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
I can change. If it helps you fall in.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription. And it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people. And these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.